Ryan had always been the kind of person who liked things steady and predictable. He grew up in a small town in Minnesota where everyone knew everyone, and life moved at a comfortable pace. His parents ran a small grocery store, and they taught him one simple rule: don't make waves, keep your head down, work hard, and avoid unnecessary drama. Ryan took that advice to heart. By the time he turned 28, his life looked exactly like he'd planned. He worked as an engineer at a mid-sized company, designing parts for machinery. It wasn't exciting, but it paid well and never kept him up at night. Every morning, he'd wake up at 6, make the same breakfast, drive the same route to work, and sit at the same desk. His coworkers called him reliable. His family called him sensible. His friends sometimes joked that he was like a robot, always operating on the same program. But Ryan didn't mind. He actually liked the predictability. While other people seemed to chase excitement and drama, he found peace in routine. On weekends, he'd go hiking on the same 3 trails he'd been visiting for years. He knew every turn, every steep section, every spot where the view opened up. There was something comforting about knowing exactly what to expect. His relationships followed the same pattern. He'd dated a few people over the years, but nothing ever got too serious. Whenever things started feeling too intense or complicated, he'd find a reason to step back. He told himself he was just being practical, waiting for the right person. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was scared of losing control, of feeling too much. Ryan's parents had an arranged marriage. They came to America with nothing and built a life through sheer determination and sacrifice. But there was never much warmth between them. They were partners in survival, not in love. Ryan watched them for years, seeing how they lived separate lives under the same roof. His mother cooked and cleaned. His father worked and paid bills. They rarely fought, but they rarely laughed together either. It was functional, efficient, and completely empty. From that, Ryan learned a dangerous lesson. He learned that feelings were messy and unpredictable. He learned that passion led to disappointment. He learned that the safest way to live was to keep your emotions on a tight leash, never letting them run wild. So that's exactly what he did. Then one Tuesday afternoon in March, his boss called him into the office. The company had landed a huge project with a partner firm in Brazil, and they needed someone to lead the technical side. It would be 6 months in Sao Paulo, working closely with the Brazilian team to develop a new product line. Ryan's first instinct was to say no. 6 months in a foreign country where he didn't speak the language? That was way outside his comfort zone. But his boss wasn't really asking. This was a career-making opportunity, the kind that could lead to promotions and bigger responsibilities. Ryan had worked hard for years, always staying late, always delivering on time. This was his reward. He couldn't turn it down without looking like he lacked ambition. So 3 weeks later, Ryan found himself on a plane to Brazil, his stomach twisted in knots. He'd never been good with change, and this was about as big a change as he could imagine. He tried to calm himself down by making lists and plans. He researched the city, found an apartment near the office, and downloaded language apps on his phone. If he could just prepare enough, maybe it wouldn't feel so overwhelming. But nothing could have prepared him for Sao Paulo. The moment he stepped out of the airport, the city hit him like a wall of sound and color. Car horns blared constantly. Street vendors shouted over each other. Buildings stretched up into the sky, covered in graffiti and murals. The air smelled like diesel fuel, mixed with grilled meat and fresh bread. People walked fast, talked loud, and seemed to live at twice the speed he was used to. His apartment was small but comfortable, located in a neighborhood called Vila Madalena. The streets were narrow and filled with bars and cafes, and every night the sound of music poured out from dozens of different places. Back home, Ryan valued quiet. Here, silence didn't seem to exist. The first week at work was equally disorienting. The office was open and loud, with people constantly moving around, having conversations across desks, and breaking into laughter at random moments. Nobody seemed to worry about keeping their voice down or staying focused. It was collaborative chaos, and Ryan didn't know how anyone got any work done. But slowly, he started to adjust. He learned which cafe made the best coffee. He figured out how to navigate the subway system. He even picked up a few Portuguese phrases, though his pronunciation made his coworkers laugh. They were kind about it though, always encouraging him to try. And then he met her. It happened during the project kickoff meeting, 2 weeks after he arrived. The conference room was packed with people from both companies, and Ryan was nervous about presenting his technical plans. He'd practiced his speech 3 times that morning, trying to account for the language barrier and cultural differences. That's when she walked in. Her name was Bella, and she was the creative director for the Brazilian team. Ryan noticed her immediately, not because she was trying to stand out, but because she seemed to fill the entire room with energy. She wore bright colors, had her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and carried a notebook covered in sketches and doodles. When she sat down, she didn't just settle into her chair like everyone else. She sprawled, comfortable and confident, like she owned the place. During the meeting, Ryan gave his presentation. He kept it technical and straightforward, explaining timelines and specifications. People nodded politely, taking notes. Then it was Bella's turn. She stood up, walked to the whiteboard, and started drawing. Not charts or graphs, but actual pictures. She sketched out ideas with quick, confident strokes, talking the whole time about how design and engineering needed to dance together, not fight. She used her hands constantly, painting pictures in the air, making everyone lean forward to catch every word. Ryan watched, fascinated. He'd never seen someone present like that. Where he used data and logic, she used stories and emotions. Where he built walls of information, she opened doors to possibilities. When she finished, the whole room burst into applause. She grinned, took a little bow, and sat back down like it was the most natural thing in the world. After the meeting, people gathered around the coffee station, chatting and introducing themselves. Ryan stood awkwardly to the side, holding his cup and trying to look occupied. Then Bella appeared next to him, her smile warm and curious. "You're the engineer from Minnesota, right?" she said in accented but clear English. "I loved your presentation. Very thorough." Ryan mumbled a thank you, caught off guard by her directness. Most people took time to warm up to strangers, but Bella acted like they were already friends. "You should come to lunch with us," she continued. "The whole team goes to this place nearby. Best feijoada in the city." She must have seen his confused expression because she laughed. "It's a traditional dish. Beans, pork, rice. Very heavy, very delicious. You'll love it." Ryan wanted to say no. He'd planned to eat at his desk and review project documents. But something about the way she looked at him, expectant and hopeful, made it impossible to refuse. So he found himself walking down crowded streets with a group of coworkers, listening to them joke and argue in rapid Portuguese. The restaurant was small and packed, with plastic tables and fans spinning slowly overhead. They squeezed around a table meant for 6 people, somehow fitting 8. Food came out in huge portions, served family style. Everyone reached across each other, scooping rice and beans and meat onto their plates. Bella sat next to Ryan, explaining each dish and encouraging him to try everything. "Don't be scared," she teased when he hesitated over something that looked particularly unusual. "Food is meant to be an adventure." Ryan took a bite and was surprised by how good it tasted. The flavors were rich and complex. Nothing like the bland meals he usually ate. Around him, his coworkers laughed and talked over each other, switching between Portuguese and English to include him. For the first time since arriving, Ryan felt something other than anxiety. He felt curious. Over the next few weeks, lunch with Bella became a regular thing. Sometimes the whole team came, sometimes just a few people, but Bella was always there, always asking Ryan questions about Minnesota, about his work, about what he thought of Brazil. She seemed genuinely interested in his answers, even when they were boring. Ryan found himself looking forward to these lunches more than he wanted to admit. Bella had a way of making everything feel lighter, more interesting. She told stories about growing up in São Paulo, about her huge family and their loud Sunday gatherings. She talked about her work with passion, explaining how design wasn't just about making things pretty, but about solving problems in creative ways. One afternoon, they stayed late at the office working on a difficult integration between his engineering specs and her design concepts. Everyone else had gone home, and the office was finally quiet. They sat side by side, laptops open, trying different solutions. "Why did you become an engineer?" Bella asked suddenly, leaning back in her chair. Ryan thought about it. "I like when things make sense," he said finally. "When there's a clear problem and a clear solution. No guesswork, no uncertainty." Bella nodded slowly. "That sounds safe." "What's wrong with safe?" "Nothing," she said. But her eyes sparkled with challenge. "But safe is also boring. Life isn't an equation you can solve. You know? Sometimes the best things happen in the uncertainty." Ryan wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because sitting there with her, working together as the city buzzed outside the windows, he felt something he'd never felt before. A kind of electricity in the air. A pull toward her that had nothing to do with logic or planning. It scared him and excited him at the same time. When they finally packed up to leave, Bella suggested they walk instead of taking the subway. The night was warm, and the streets of Villa Maddalena were alive with people spilling out of bars and restaurants. Music drifted from open doorways. Street artists displayed paintings on the sidewalks. Everything felt vibrant and alive. They walked slowly, talking about nothing important, and Ryan realized he didn't want the night to end. The next 2 months passed in a blur of meetings, deadlines, and stolen moments with Bella. They started spending more time together outside of work. She showed him parts of the city tourists never saw, little neighborhoods where her friends ran cafes or art galleries. She took him to a samba club where live music played until 3 in the morning, and even though Ryan couldn't dance, she pulled him onto the floor anyway. "Just feel the rhythm," she shouted over the music, laughing at his awkward attempts. "Stop thinking so much." That was the problem, though. Ryan couldn't stop thinking. About her. About how she made him feel. About what was happening between them. They hadn't labeled it or discussed it, but something had definitely shifted. The way she touched his arm when she talked. The way she looked at him across conference tables. The way his heart jumped every time his phone buzzed with a message from her. One Saturday, Bella invited him to Ibirapuera Park for a picnic. She showed up with a basket full of food and a blanket covered in colorful patterns. They found a spot under a tree and spread everything out. Families played nearby. Couples walked hand in hand. Dogs chased each other across the grass. "This is my favorite place in the city," Bella said, lying back on the blanket and closing her eyes against the sun. "When everything gets too crazy, I come here to remember that beauty still exists." Ryan watched her, the way the light played across her face, the way she seemed completely at peace. He felt something crack open inside his chest. Something he'd kept locked away for years. It terrified him. "Bella," he started, not sure what he wanted to say. She opened her eyes and turned toward him, propping herself up on one elbow. "Yes? He stopped. The words stuck in his throat. How could he explain what he was feeling when he didn't understand it himself? How could he tell her that being with her felt like standing at the edge of a cliff? Exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. She reached over and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to say it." But that was the thing. He wanted to say it. For the first time in his life, he wanted to jump into the uncertainty, to let himself feel everything without holding back. So he leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and tentative. And when she kissed him back, the whole world seemed to tilt on its axis. After that, they were inseparable. They spent evenings at her apartment, cooking together, and watching Brazilian movies with English subtitles. They spent weekends exploring the city, finding hidden restaurants and vintage bookstores. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. But as the relationship deepened, Ryan started to panic. He'd wake up at 3 in the morning, his mind racing with questions. What was he doing? This was supposed to be a temporary assignment. In 4 months, he'd go back to Minnesota, back to his quiet apartment and predictable life. How could he let himself fall for someone when there was an expiration date stamped on everything? He started pulling back without realizing it. When Bella suggested he meet her family, he made excuses. When she talked about the future, he changed the subject. When she reached for him, he was there. But part of him had already started building walls. Bella noticed. Of course she noticed. She was too perceptive not to. One night, they were at her apartment after dinner. Ryan was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, half present. Bella came out of the kitchen and stood in front of him, arms crossed. "What are you so afraid of?" she asked quietly. Ryan looked up, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. 1 minute, you're here with me. Really here. The next minute, you're gone. Somewhere else in your head. You keep 1 foot out the door, always ready to run." "That's not true," Ryan said, but even he could hear the lie in his voice. Bella sat down next to him, her eyes searching his face. "I'm not asking you for forever. I'm just asking you to be present now, in this moment." "But you can't do that. Can you? Because being present means being vulnerable. And you're terrified of that." Ryan wanted to argue, to defend himself. But she was right. He was terrified. Terrified of how much he felt for her. Terrified of how much power she had to hurt him. Terrified that if he let himself love her completely, he'd lose himself in the process. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my whole life avoiding this exact feeling. And now that I'm in it, I don't know how to handle it." Bella reached over and took his hand. "Nobody knows how to handle it. That's what makes it real. Love isn't something you figure out and solve like one of your engineering problems. It's messy and scary, and sometimes it hurts. But it's also the most beautiful thing in the world." Ryan felt tears sting his eyes, which only made him more uncomfortable. He never cried. Crying was losing control. And he couldn't afford to lose control. But sitting there with Bella, her hand in his, something inside him started to crumble. "What if I'm not good at this?" he asked. "What if I mess it up?" "Then you mess it up," she said simply, "and we figure it out together. That's how relationships work. But you have to try. You have to be willing to feel everything, even the scary parts." That night, after Bella fell asleep, Ryan lay awake staring at the ceiling. He thought about his parents and their empty marriage. He thought about all the years he'd spent building walls around his heart. He thought about how safe and small his life had been before he came to Brazil, and he realized that safety had cost him everything worth having. The next morning, Ryan called his sister. It was 2 a.m. in Minnesota, but he knew she'd answer. She always did. "This better be important," she said groggily. "I think I'm in love," Ryan blurted out, "and I have no idea what to do about it." There was a long pause. Then his sister laughed, not unkindly. "Took you long enough to figure that out." Ryan spent the next hour telling her everything. About Bella, about how she made him feel, about how terrified he was of the intensity. His sister listened without interrupting, which he was grateful for. When he finally finished, she sighed. "You know what your problem is?" she said. "You think feeling things deeply makes you weak. But it's actually the opposite. It takes so much more strength to be vulnerable than it does to hide behind walls. But what if it doesn't work out? What if I open myself up completely and then lose her?" "Then you'll hurt," his sister said simply. "And then you'll heal. And you'll be better for having felt something real instead of spending your whole life numb." "Ryan, I've watched you sleepwalk through life for years. This is the first time you've sounded actually alive. Don't throw that away because you're scared." After they hung up, Ryan sat in Bella's apartment, watching the city wake up through the window. Vendors were setting up their stalls on the street below. People were heading to work, carrying coffee and bags. Life was happening all around him, messy and unpredictable and beautiful. He thought about his contract ending in a few months. He thought about Minnesota and his old life waiting for him, And he realized he didn't want to go back. Not to the old apartment, not to the same routines, not to the person he used to be. That version of Ryan felt like a stranger now, someone who'd been alive but never really living. When Bella woke up, Ryan was making breakfast. She shuffled into the kitchen, her hair messy from sleep, and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "You're still here," she said, sounding surprised. "I'm still here," he confirmed. "And I want to talk about something." They sat down at her small kitchen table, and Ryan took a deep breath. "I want to extend my contract. Stay in Brazil longer. I already talked to my boss last week about the possibility, and he said they'd approve it if I wanted." Bella's eyes widened. "Really? You'd do that?" "I'd do that. But I need you to know something. I'm not good at this. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to get scared and probably try to push you away again. I've spent so long keeping people at arm's length that I don't really know how to do anything else." "Ryan, but I want to try," he continued. "I want to learn. Because being with you, really being with you, is worth the fear. You make me feel things I didn't think I was capable of feeling. And yeah, it's intense and overwhelming, and sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night panicking. But I'd rather feel all of that than go back to feeling nothing." Bella reached across the table and took both his hands. "That's all I needed to hear. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest and present." The next few months weren't easy. Ryan had to fight against every instinct that told him to retreat and protect himself. He started seeing a therapist, something he'd always dismissed as unnecessary. The therapist helped him understand that his fear of emotions wasn't a personality trait but a learned behavior from watching his parents' cold marriage. "You associated feelings with failure," the therapist explained. "But feelings aren't the problem. It's what we do with them that matters." Ryan learned to sit with uncomfortable emotions instead of trying to fix them or push them away. When he felt overwhelmed by how much he cared for Bella, he practiced telling her instead of withdrawing. When he felt scared about the future, he shared that fear instead of letting it fester. It was hard work, probably the hardest thing he'd ever done. Engineering problems had clear solutions. Emotional growth was messy and non-linear. Some days he felt like he was making progress. Other days he felt like he was right back where he started. But Bella was patient. When he had bad days, when the old patterns tried to reassert themselves, she didn't take it personally. She gave him space when he needed it, and pulled him close when he needed that instead. She showed him that love wasn't about being perfect or never struggling. It was about showing up, being honest, and choosing each other even when it was difficult. One Sunday, Bella finally convinced him to come to her family's weekly gathering. Ryan was nervous. Bella had described her family as loud and overwhelming. Everything he usually avoided, but he'd promised to try new things, to step outside his comfort zone. Her family's house was in a neighborhood on the outskirts of São Paulo, a modest place with a big backyard. When they arrived, at least 20 people were already there, from toddlers to grandparents. Music played from speakers. Someone was grilling meat. Kids ran around screaming and laughing. Bella's mother hugged him like he was already part of the family, even though they'd never met. Her father shook his hand and immediately started asking about engineering. Genuinely interested, her siblings teased him good-naturedly about his Portuguese, but helped him when he struggled to find words. The kids climbed all over him, assuming he was there to play. It was chaos. It was overwhelming. And it was wonderful. Sitting in Bella's family's backyard, surrounded by noise and laughter and life, Ryan had a moment of clarity. This was what he'd been missing his whole life. Not the quiet and control he'd thought he needed, but connection. Real, messy, complicated human connection. He watched Bella move through her family, hugging her grandmother, helping her mother carry food, chasing her nephew around the yard. She belonged to all these people, was woven into their lives in 1,000 small ways, and she was inviting him to be part of that too. Later, as the sun was setting and people were starting to leave, Bella's grandmother pulled Ryan aside. She spoke only Portuguese, so Bella had to translate, but the old woman's eyes were bright with understanding. "She says she can tell you're a serious person, Bella translated, smiling. Someone who thinks too much. But she also says that's okay. Because my granddaughter thinks with her heart, and together you balance each other. The grandmother patted his cheek, said something else in Portuguese, and shuffled away. Bella laughed. What did she say? Ryan asked. She said love isn't supposed to be comfortable. If it is, you're doing it wrong. Ryan thought about that on the drive back to Bella's apartment. His whole life, he'd been chasing comfort and safety. But the most meaningful experiences, the moments that had changed him, had all been uncomfortable. Moving to Brazil, opening himself up to Bella, confronting his fears about emotions and vulnerability. A year into his extended contract, Ryan had transformed in ways he couldn't have imagined. He still loved solving engineering problems, but he'd learned to appreciate the beauty of questions that didn't have clear answers. He still valued routine, but he'd learned to welcome spontaneity. He still sometimes got overwhelmed by intense emotions, but he'd learned to ride the waves instead of fighting against them. One evening, he and Bella were walking through Ibirapuera Park, the same place where they'd had their first picnic. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Families were packing up their things. Couples sat on benches, watching the day end. Do you ever regret it? Bella asked suddenly. Staying here? Changing your whole life? 3-1. Asks S. Ryan thought about his old apartment in Minnesota. Probably rented to someone else by now. He thought about his old routines, the same coffee shop and hiking trails. He thought about the person he used to be, so careful and controlled. Not for a second, he said honestly. Coming here, meeting you, learning to feel things deeply, instead of just going through the motions. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though it's scary sometimes, especially because it's scary sometimes. He stopped walking and turned to face her. You know what I realized? My whole life, I thought my biggest strength was staying calm and controlled. But that wasn't strength. It was just fear dressed up as discipline. Real strength is letting yourself be vulnerable. It's choosing to feel everything, the good and the bad. Because that's what makes us human. Bella smiled. That warm, genuine smile that still made his heart skip a beat. Listen to you. Getting all philosophical. I learned from the best, he said, pulling her close. They stood there as the park emptied around them, as the sky deepened from orange to purple to dark blue. Ryan felt Bella's heartbeat against his chest, felt the warmth of her breath, felt the solid reality of this moment. And for once, he wasn't thinking about what came next, or worrying about all the ways things could go wrong. He was just present, fully and completely, in the intensity of being alive and in love. His species, as he used to think of himself, the emotionally defended, the terminally careful, the people who protected themselves by feeling less, did have a defense against overwhelming emotions. But it wasn't building walls or maintaining distance. The defense was acceptance. It was acknowledging that yes, love was intense and terrifying and unpredictable. Yes, opening yourself up meant you could get hurt. Yes, caring deeply about another person meant giving them enormous power over your happiness. And it was choosing to do it anyway, because the alternative, Ryan now understood, wasn't safety. It was just a slower kind of dying. It was going through life half awake, experiencing everything at a distance, never quite connecting with the world or the people in it. 2 years after arriving in Brazil, Ryan made the decision permanent. He accepted a full-time position with the São Paulo office. He and Bella moved in together, finding an apartment in Vila Madalena, with big windows and space for both their chaotic work styles. He still video called his family in Minnesota every Sunday, and they'd finally started asking Bella to join the calls too. His mother, surprisingly, was the one who understood best. During one call, after his father had said goodbye and his sister had hung up, his mother stayed on the line. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly, "for having the courage to choose differently than I did." Ryan felt a lump in his throat. His mother had never talked about her marriage like that before, never acknowledged the emptiness at its core. "You deserved better," Ryan said. "Maybe," she agreed. "But that's my story, not yours. Your story is different, better. Don't waste time feeling guilty about that. Just live it fully." After they hung up, Ryan sat for a long time thinking about generational patterns, about how we inherit not just genetics but fears and coping mechanisms. He thought about the gift his mother had actually given him, not the lesson about avoiding emotions, but the warning. She'd shown him what happened when you prioritized safety over connection, when you built a life that looked functional from the outside but was hollow within. He'd almost followed that same path. If his company hadn't sent him to Brazil, if he hadn't met Bella, if he hadn't been forced out of his comfort zone, he probably would have continued sleepwalking through life. The thought made him shudder. That night, lying in bed next to Bella, listening to the sounds of the city outside their window, Ryan felt something he'd never experienced before. Not happiness exactly, though he was happy. Not contentment, though he was content. It was something deeper. It was the feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be, of having found a life that fit him, instead of trying to fit himself into a life that felt safe. "You okay?" Bella murmured sleepily, sensing he was still awake. "More than okay," Ryan said. "I was just thinking about how different everything is now. Different good or different bad? Different real," he said. "Everything before feels like it was happening to someone else. This is the first time my life has actually felt like mine." Bella rolled over to face him, her eyes soft in the darkness. "That's because you finally let yourself feel it. All of it. The intensity, the fear, the joy, everything. That's what being alive actually means." Ryan pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the weight of her against him. He still had moments of panic sometimes, moments when the intensity of his emotions scared him. But now he recognized those moments for what they were. Not signs that something was wrong, but reminders that he was fully engaged with life, that he'd stopped protecting himself from experience and started embracing it. His species, he thought with a smile, had finally evolved.